Born Primitive Outdoor is proud to partner with Montana Knife Company, Marsupial Gear, Evolution Outdoors, Sheep Feet, and Capture Gear. Thanks for tuning in, and thanks to our sponsors. Born Primitive Outdoor podcast, and today I have my buddy and mapping genius Bill at Spartan Forge on the podcast to talk about the Spartan Forge and some of the new updates. I appreciate you coming on, Bill.
Hey man, thanks for having me.
Yeah, definitely. I obviously I've been a huge supporter of Spartan Forge, over the last few years, and satellite. Your high-res satellite imagery is kind of one of the main things that I really can showcase or show people. Many other things, LiDAR, things like that. But you recently had some huge updates on Spartan Forge. Not to dive too far ahead, how hard are those updates? Like, what kind of a pain in the butt are you dealing with getting that kind of updates? Because I don't think people really understand the back end or the back side of getting these mapping software kind of, I guess, to the public.
Yeah, so it was a big lift for us. It started like 18 months ago. We originally wanted it to go faster, but we're now dealing with multiple providers, and some of them are in competition with each other, some of them aren't. So when it comes to putting this together, it's the first thing is just like the contracts, getting all the contracts lined out, competing entities. We had to drop some providers, bring some providers on together, and then other providers we fund with or do stuff together, like residential areas or on, I guess you call it like realtors and that type of thing. Everybody's got their hands in this. So trying to first, contractually just get all of that stuff together was a push, but then, technically inside of the application, serving multiple sources of data and putting all of that together and then making it as seamless as possible, which I think we've gotten pretty close. On this latest update now, the map will tell you whether or not you've got UAV in the area instead of just showing you, and then stitching together all of those multiple, areas and all of the historical imagery. Now it's like we've tripled the coverage. And we are at most places have 3 to 4 years of historical imagery. Some places have up to 15 years of historical imagery. So, it's been a long road. It's been about 18 months from where we put out the first UAV layer to now where we're dealing with, I don't even know how many sources of imagery we have now, probably somewhere between 7 and 10. There's just a ton that goes into that, putting it all together, but then putting it into a user experience where it's as simple as it can be when someone's looking at it in the app. So it's been a long road to hoe, but we're here and we're very excited about this update we just put out.
Now, when I had talked to Sloan about this originally with the updates, when he had said leaf off, high-res UAV leaf off imagery, you are grabbing the imagery from the fall time frame during hunting season. That's what leaf off imagery means. I'm only clarifying that because I'll get that question for sure.
Yeah, so we prioritize that imagery. Like some segments of the imagery providers, we don't use a lot of like the green, like blotchy imagery because you can't really tell what's going on. Even from a UAV standpoint, it just all looks like tree cover. So in this latest update, we really prioritized making sure all of the leaf off imagery was, either a default in the area or it was accessible in the app. And that helps a lot with identifying transition, identifying, structures on the ground, whether were improvements in the past or logging operations or like they cleared areas for logging or the path to get the trucks in and out. All of that becomes abundantly clear. And then when you pair that with the LiDAR, I think you've got a really deadly combination. And the leaf off is especially good for, whether you're talking elk or whitetail. A lot of them transition between different types of cover and canopy. And that leaf off imagery really makes that stuff pop.
Yeah, no, it does. And I get the question really frequently as far as what my e-scouting looks like compared to my boots on the ground scouting and so on and so forth. And the one thing I can say is I would say more than rangefinders or technology in bows or mapping software has definitely changed the game as far as saving maybe some boots on the ground, especially if you know what you're doing. And in my case, I don't use, I'm still old school. I use a map, just a standard paper map a lot at my house, but I don't use a topo map when I'm using Spartan Forge as much. Sometimes I use the hybrid. I get a lot more, I mean, quite honestly, out of the, obviously the UAV and the LiDAR. But when people are asking you as far as the scouting side of things on using Spartan Forge for that, to me, when I'm looking, let's say, whether it's elk or mule deer or sheep at a basin, right? I'm looking at a hanging or a high basin. Topography wise, obviously you can do a lot of adjustments on that, but where the LiDAR comes into play for me is egress. Their escape routes. Do they have those escape routes? Where are they going? And that leaf off and LiDAR, to me, really helps with that when you're getting at that kind of fringe of going from tree line to, subalpine, whatever. Rambling on here. Explain to people a little bit better than I can in my redneck way of LiDAR, what that does, because it really is something I don't think people use as much as they should, and incorporating that with obviously, the last 3 to however many years you have of data where you can backdate.
Yeah, so I mean, LiDAR, the simple way of explaining it first, it's light detection and ranging, like a radar is radio detection and ranging. And what it's using is light pulses to map the Earth's surface. And like you said, egress is especially important. But, on a standard, 1 to 50,000, 1 to 30,000 topo map, the contour lines, however far close they are together, you'll miss a lot of undulations or changes in the topography, where whether it's, thermals or the way that the wind is working, animals will use these cuts and stuff that are not apparent on topo to like scent check a whole area, especially if the wind is right. Or using them to bail out of an area like you talked about, and you'll miss those if you're not looking at them in LiDAR, or, rocks or rock formations, things that can impact wind. Like if you conceptualize wind like a stream passing through an area, when you understand the predominant wind, and then you look at what rock, even on LiDAR, you can see the rocks, you can see the flat benches, the areas, and these benches and these smooth parts of the topography, animals will use to move through to scent check an area before they go in there to feed or to look at, look for does or to look for cows. And understanding all of that, those things, you would never have access to those or be able to see them. It is especially important for like myself, and I know a guy like you and other people who are doing out-of-state hunts where there's no option to be on the ground until, you're out there for your 10, 14, 20 days, whatever it is. So the more preparation that you can do before you get there to kind of economize your efforts and know exactly where you want to go and scout and where you want to go look. If you're doing that alone with just a topo map, you're going to be missing out a lot on all of the tiny little, imperfections or tiny little undulations in the area where LiDAR makes that clear, especially when you throw it into 3D or you throw on the slope angle and you can see, the flat parts or the especially treacherous parts where on a topo map, it may not look like it's an area that you wouldn't be able to traverse, but then you look at it on you look at it on LiDAR and you pop it into 3D with a slope angle, and then it's obvious that you'll need to take a different route around an area. But then also know that that's a restriction for an animal as well, unless you're dealing with something like goats, where they will just avoid certain areas because it's just far too steep. Of course, they could go in there if they wanted to and use that area if they wanted to, but they'd only do that in like a highly pressured situation or where they're running away or freaked out or whatever. But by and large, the animals will avoid those areas, and it's just places that you won't pick them up on a standard topo map or even aerial map and that's why we offer that leaf off coverage. And then if you're on the web app, you can go with the side-by-side view, and you can look at the canopy, you can look at the leaf off, and then you can look at the slope angle and the LiDAR to really get a good idea of how the ground lays out.
And that LiDAR is I say adequate. If you know what you're looking at, you can actually see goat paths or escape routes or whatever above tree line with LiDAR at times. So it's pretty, the technology is pretty crazy. And so, with the leaf off, like you had talked about, earlier in the spring or whatever, it's not going to be it's going to be a giant green, ball when you're looking down at it. But like when I'm scouting, when you look at, they need elk, deer, whatever, they have to eat and they sleep, drink, and fornicate, right? And so, you can find those things. And once you find where those are at, then you can, again, look like what you're talking about, finding the different benches and things like that. You can do the majority of that without leaving your house if you know what you're looking at. So it does save a ton of time once you have boots on the ground. But with what you have, it's what your updates and what you have going on. What's the future look like? Like, what else are you trying to work on, or just keep improving like what you have now? As time goes on, because I don't know, how good can it get, right? Like, how good can Spartan Forge get, I guess, is the question, because the UAV, the high res, is about as good as anything a civilian could get at this point, from my knowledge.
Yeah, so I mean, there's obvious improvements. Like out west, our coverage ranges from 30 to 70% of states, and we're working on improving that right now. So I'm hoping in the next couple of months we'll have tons of coverage in places like Wyoming and Montana. So just upping that UAV coverage and the historical in those areas are efforts that I'm working on now. But then making the LiDAR, even easier to understand. We're doing some really cool stuff. We're experimenting right now with some really cool stuff on the LiDAR to make it render more like a 3D model. And really, everything I try to do with the app is just reducing entropy. And what I mean by that is just the amount of chaos, getting a person, any lay person, to sit down and look at the map and have a firm understanding what's going on. We're starting to render these LiDAR maps and present them in a certain way, which I think will make them super palatable for people. So really, even though it comes from pushing technological capacity, that's not the goal. The goal is not just throwing as much tech at the map as possible. The goal is actually making it easier and easier to understand so that there's less guesswork when it comes to getting a firm grasp on what you're looking at on the ground. So that's kind of now that comes from technology, but the technology that goes into it, my hope is that it's not apparent, or it's not the first thing people think about when they look at the app is just, oh, wow, look at all the tech. It's more like, oh, wow, look at how simple this thing is to use. And that's actually the harder thing to do. So the future is just about making the areas more palatable, making it more fun and interactive to work with. So it feels less like you're spending your time, scouting, and more like you're interacting with an application that's fun to look at and easy to understand out the gate. So that's what we're focusing on here in the next, 6 to 12 months or so.
Gotcha. Now, one question that I get asked, because I think mine must update automatically, but when you want to go update, like, obviously get the newest version, you go to the App Store, and then how does that work for people to update their what they currently have, their current plan?
Yeah, so if they don't have automatic updates in the App Store, they can just search for the application itself inside of the App Store, whether they're on Google, like Android, or they're on Apple. And then when the application comes up, it'll tell you the last time it updated, and then it'll tell you there's an update available. We just, on Android and Apple, in the last 10 days, we just dropped 2 updates. So the application is, you'll know when it's updated because it looks quite a bit different. There's the UAV badge on the bottom that tells you whether or not you're in a UAV area with the dates when you have the UAV map turned on. We fixed a lot with the UI and the UX as far as swiping the bottom sheets, how the tracks look. The tracks in the past, in my opinion, were pretty ugly. We were trying to, show fixes, because what these other apps aren't showing, or, people don't quite understand, is your phone is set up to sample GPS points at an interval based on battery consumption. So if you're like in, low power usage, or you're trying to minimize the amount of battery, it won't sample the GPS as well. Whereas if you're in like high performance mode, then it's sampling all the time. So we have a line now that's like a dash line that shows you your tracks that you record. But then when you zoom into a certain level and you get really close to them, you can see all of those GPS fixes. So if there's a moment in your track where your path looks wild or it looks like something you wouldn't have walked, you can zoom in and then see how many GPS fixes there are and that type of thing. And we've added more high resolution LiDAR, a ton more, as I said before, high resolution mapping. So it's quite a different app from before, and the UAV coverage is far more than it was before as well. So, what we'll be working on during this season as well is getting Apple CarPlay integration in there. So if you're doing antelope and doing some road scouting, or you're running around at night listening for elk and trying to map them on public, we'll have that CarPlay version as well here coming out pretty soon. So they can check that in the App Store as well when we get that out and that's supported. And it's just as easy as looking the app up and pushing the update button when you want to get all that new stuff in there. So I encourage people to go do that. Let us know what they think about it.
Gotcha. Now I have one question. Will you, and I mean, this is personal for me because I'm weird, but UTM, will you have an update at some point where you can program?
Hello?
Can you hear me?
Hey, I can hear you. I lost you there. I don't know where you lost me at.
I don't know. I was getting ready to ask a question. We'll just go from there. So this is kind of more of a personal thing, or not personal. I really like to use like UTM. Will you have an update eventually where you can have, set Spartan Forge up to read off a UTM coordinate? Is that something you're going to do at any time, or am I the weird guy? There's not much of a demand for that.
No, we are. We're doing UTM and MGRS and other coordinate. We're trying to put in all coordinate updates there. Not sure if that will happen during the season or not. It depends on I think that's more of a back end thing. Like it gets done on the back end of the application instead of the UI itself. But we are doing that. Like we've made a step in that direction. One of the things you'll notice now, which is kind of different from our other applications, it's kind of nerdy, like mapping stuff, but we've also done like an accurate Mercator projection of the Earth on the mobile app, on the desktop app. So when you look at it, Mercator, basically how the lines are drawn on the ground. Other apps are not accurate on that. The coordinates actually fall off. So our goal there was to first get the Mercator projection correct, so that you actually know where you're standing on the ground, because as I said, other apps aren't quite correct on that. And then the second thing was getting to that, UTM, MGRS, and those other ones. So yeah, we'll be introducing that here in the future.
Yeah. So, me being old school, new school, kind of hype, integrating both, meaning, manual and navigation, and then obviously the Spartan Forge. With most people, it seems like that use any mapping software like Spartan Forge. What would you say the percentage of people that are still old school? It seems like it's less than 5% that actually still read a paper map. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would say the same thing. I mean, I still carry paper maps, especially if I'm going into an area that I don't know. I'll still print ones out and keep them in my pack, or cover them with plastic, or keep them in an envelope and use them as backup. But yeah, the same thing. I almost run into nobody who's doing that these days. I'd say 97% of people are relying on technology, which is fine as long as you have a bunch of them. And that's another thing I do. And it's the old adage, kind of 2 is 1, 1 is none. Is I'll have my phone, I'll have backup batteries for my phone, I'll have my Garmin, like my straight Garmin GPS device, and I'll have my Garmin InReach, which also has mapping capability. I have my Garmin watch, which syncs up with both of those things, and then I have paper maps. So for me, it's a safety thing, really. It's just I don't want to get lost. And technology is, always going to fail you at some point, especially when you need it most. So, yeah, it would be nice if some of those numbers went up, just because, I don't want to hear about people relying on one piece of technology and getting lost out in the woods, or getting turned around, especially like when you're doing a late night, like elk pack out or mule deer pack out, and, time's of the essence. You don't want to get lost or turn around. Like, I encourage people to have, 3 or 4 methods of navigation. So, yeah, but I would agree with you. 95% of people probably are only using the 1, maybe 2.
Well, and I think for me, what I suggest for guys is to print the map out for when you're back home, at the very least, like a larger scale. And you can look at that as you're looking at Spartan Forge. and, see what it looks like on a larger map. You got a little bit bigger picture, but it's pretty hard not to navigate with Spartan Forge when you're on the ground. Getting a map out is a pain in the butt and everything, because it's just easier. But the thing is you can be more effective having a larger map when you're back home, and then again integrating both of them together. The thing a paper map doesn't do, you're gonna have 25 of them to get all the data that you have in Spartan Forge. You're going to be printing out a lot of different maps where you're at a click of a button on Spartan. So being able to go from, like the hybrid where you have the topo lines and UAV and then LiDAR or whatever else, it's pretty hard to pass that up. I mean, it's just quicker. So, in my case, obviously, you stop, you set your camp up. I use a Fortrex, a Garmin, like the little wristwatch, whatever, that's up to a 901 now. I'll mark my camp on that as a backup, and then it's so quick to just drop a pin at your camp, and then you wander around all day. It's good to have the backup again with that Garmin, but it's just so much easier to navigate. And then the offline map system is super handy as well, because you can pick, do 3 offline maps of an entire area ahead of time. And so it's a little bit more of a breather room for somebody that's less experienced in the woods to get back to your camp or to get to the wallow or your trail camera. And it just makes you more lethal, more effective when you're on the mountain. And me doing, some pretty crazier hunts or whatever, as simple as just marking my boots on a stalk is huge, where you turn a GPS on, it has to link up with the satellites, and then you mark it. You can do all that. It's no problem. You do it on your watch, but you get your phone on you all the time anyway. So it's just faster. Turn it on, hit the button, goes to right where you're at, and drop a pin. But I do think I don't think people get what they should out of your software. I guess I think people could get a lot more out of it by learning land nav and get a lot more out of what your software has to offer as a whole. I don't know if you would agree with that or not.
I agree with you for sure. I mean, one of the things that I do, and again, like whenever I'm out in the middle of nowhere, people, it's not something people really conceptualize, but I'll set up my map and have some dead reckoning and some understanding of, all right, like if I'm at a high point, this is, there's some cell phone towers over here. There's a rock formation here. Here are the 4 highways that surround where I'm going to be hunting, so that if I were to get lost, I can walk in one direction and I'm like, oh, I hit Highway 101. I know I'm east of where I'm supposed to be, or Highway 66 is south of me. So now I know I'm north of where I'm supposed to be, and the camp sets up here. And then that way, if you can get to like some high ground, like just stuff that you can learn beforehand. In the military, we call it area familiarization, or AFAM, but it's just like, I have these guardrails or these handrails that show me in an area in case I really am lost. I can, use the stars, I can use the sunset, I can use the sunrise, I can use a mountain range, I can use a highway formation as just handrails to say, okay, if I've hit these places, or if I can't see these places from a high ground, then I know that I'm turned around and here's how I can orient myself. That again is just, super useful information that can turn you, from being lost for a couple of hours to being lost for a couple of days. Like if you know those things, you can do yourself a lot of good. So I totally agree with you on that.
Yeah, and I've used my the Spartan Forge a lot for fishing. I mean, off the subject of hunting and LiDAR and everything else, when I go to float a river I haven't floated before, the resolution's good enough. I actually can mark spots that I'm going to, be floating through that look like they should hold fish, and I'll put waypoints going down the river, that I'll look at when I'm floating, right? And I'll do that. I do the same thing when I'm hunting. I'll have little spots marked of like, okay, here's a bench that I want to look at, preseason scouting or during season. This creek should have water coming through year round. Check that out. I mean, again, pre-mapping all of those things ahead of time. People don't do that as much as they probably should. And so there's a lot of different things, I think, as people get more familiar with navigation in general, and the software could definitely get more out of it. But, overall, with the feedback you get, what would you say the number one issue people have with software in general?
What, I'm sorry, could you restate the last part of that question? What was the number one issue? What
would you say the number one issue people have, not with your software, not with Spartan Forge, meaning like, whatever updates, what would you say the number one thing people have trouble maybe comprehending or getting familiar with when they're using like a mapping software like Spartan Forge at first?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the first thing I would say is people just use it to drop waypoints, kind of like you said. They don't use the historical imagery as much. They don't go back in time and look at stuff. They don't look at, certain points of the year. Another feature that we have in there that people don't use is you can use the journal feature to look up historical weather. So when you have animals on cell cameras, you can drop a journal entry and it will pull the weather data from that time and the weather direction. So, using that historical weather, but then also using like our polar plot that gives historical wind averages, because the wind by and large is predictable based on the time of the year, rotation of the earth, the time of season, and in one area, it's, you're going to see a southwest wind, 60% of the time. So that when you're doing that off season mobile scouting, you are thinking about your entry and exit points with that southwest wind in mind, especially if you know where you're going to be hunting, whether it's a particular rock face or a particular mountain or a particular prairie. When you're doing your off-season scouting and you're using that historical imagery, you can now look at, okay, here's what the wind is, 60% of the time in this area, so that you can start thinking about campsites, your setup, and that type of stuff. Because especially with elk or mule deer hunting, like you can get pretty aggressive with your camp setup as long as you know what the wind is doing. So when you're scouting those things off-season, or even like you said with fishing, we introduced a lot of fishing points in there. We're going to be doing LiDAR representations of water formations and like where it's deep, where it's not deep, that type of stuff. But understanding how the wind is going to push water, especially when you're fishing on lakes, all of that historical data in the off season and diving into that is something that I think people don't realize is there, because they don't really they don't mess around in the Intel tab as much as they probably should and look at the historical trends and the amount of hunters in the area, or using, like, we have an Eastman's Tag Hub feature where you can look into, your best odds of drawing certain tags. Like I just drew my first Iowa tag this year. I've been applying there for what seems like 71 years. And just nailing down, all of those odds and stacking all of those things in your favor. So before you pull the trigger on a hunting license or drawing for a tag or a fishing license, you once again have a really good historical concept on a place that you might not live anywhere near, that you're only going to once a year, where your only option is digital scouting or historical data ingestion before you get into the area and actually get on the ground. So, that's why I kind of say it is a mapping application, but it's got a lot more to it when it comes to the research. When it comes to Cyber Scout, people in our app, especially, I'd say Cyber Scout's one of the most underutilized tools. I think the last time I looked at it, only about 20% of guys spend time in there, but the 20% of people who do spend a ton of time in there, like you ask that any question on outdoor pursuits, anything, whether it comes to trad bow or paper tuning or MOA or, time of flight on a high velocity round, or you look at, what things factor into a long or a short shot, how to better make yourself a better primitive archer, how to build your own bow. I used it for brain tanning a doe last year. And it, walk me through step by step, and it can talk to you like you're an expert like yourself, or you can have it talk to you like you're a second grader who's just picking up a bow for the first time. And there's a lot of use, like that is a very useful large language model that is tuned specifically for outdoorsmen.
Yeah, and I honestly I don't use that as much as I probably should, either. But like I said, I get stuck in my own ways and use, you get used to using something a specific way. But that is very, I use Chat GPT like crazy. It's the same kind of thing. The weather, I don't hardly even use my weather app anymore. Talk a little bit more about that as far as the the weather app that's in Spartan Forge, as well as like it shows like primary, like moving times, feeding times. I'm saying that incorrectly, but talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so we've got a very robust weather catalog that we ingested from multiple sources, and then we have historical weather in there as well. So we can get down to, we have 10 days of weather, and then it's all hour by hour, and it gets updated every 3 hours. So that's very accurate. It's one of the most accurate ones out there. There's the historical weather. There's another feature that's on the web and mobile is the sun exposure layer. So you can look at where animals, in the summertime they're bedding in cool areas, in the wintertime they're bedding in warm areas. You can look at what the sun canopy is in an area and what areas of a mountain will hold sunlight the longest or the shortest. And you can actually map out and find bedding areas. I was doing it last year on my elk hunt, because it was extremely hot when I was on my elk hunt last year. And I was able to use that sun exposure layer to look at the areas on the side of a mountain where the temperature was much cooler because the sun rarely ever touched these spots on the side of the mountain. And we'd walk to those areas, and I'd get within 20, having the wind in my face, knowing the thermals, I would walk to these mapped areas that I use the sun exposure layer, and I was getting within 20 yards of bedded elk. And then there'll be a video coming out where I'm, hunting with the Seek One guys. I mapped an area on the side of this mountain where we were elk hunting, and there was an elk bedded within 20 yards. And just because there was this fallen timber, I could not see him. And I got within 20 yards of him going very slowly and then spooked him out of there. And I think that happened to me 3 or 4 times. And so that's super deadly when you know where the cool areas are on the side of a mountain, especially when it's very hot, or in the late season, knowing where the warm areas are where the sunlight's touching it all day long. And then you couple that with the LiDAR layer and the wind layer and our hour by hour forecast and the historical weather that's in there. And again, you can learn a lot about an area before you ever step in there, and that informs your scouting, or if you're trying to get in close on some elk that are bedded or whatever, is just knowing where they might be and then using that weather to inform that approach, I think is super deadly. And I know guys like yourself, or like, Andy May uses it on mule deer a ton. And other guys just, that's not something that's presented in the mobile version of any of these applications besides ours. And it's, when you pair that with the LiDAR and the historical weather, I think it's deadly.
No, I agree, and I use it. I use it not just whitetail hunting. I use it for everything, even fishing, really. But well, man, is there anything like else that you want to cover that I've missed on any of these, updates or anything else? When people ask me about this app, my number, everything we've talked about, but I really focus on that high-res imagery, the LiDAR, and then the weather forecast. But what am I missing? Is there anything else we've left out?
Well, I think guys that follow you are really looking for kind of like, that old school knowledge that's applicable in the woods. And that's something that's inside of Cyber Scout as well. So whether it's guys that are coming to your schoolhouse to learn, I believe that we're outfitting them with Spartan Forge accounts. If we're not, let me know and we'll make them all free ones, all the guys that come to your guys' instruction. But, having Cyber Scout to inform you or to just ask questions, like no matter what your experience level is, you always want to look at something in a different way. So if you're encountering some questions and you just want to look at things in a different way, you can at first have that question and answer session with something like Cyber Scout to kind of reinform or look at things in a new way. And like I said, a lot of people aren't using that. The historical weather, again, I think is huge. It's something that people don't focus on, but it's more about just making people independent actors so they don't have to rely on someone else or finding time to do things. They can learn on their own and get to a pretty good proficiency level before they start going out and asking questions and kind of, informing people to learn on their own, giving them that ability to learn on their own before they go out and, waste someone else's time with questions that is something that they can easily learn on their own, I think is also super deadly because it's all about just learning more stuff. And then, as far as what we're doing going into next year, like I said, with the car play stuff, we do a ton of stuff with veterans hunts. We're doing more this year. We've really put all of the profits of this company, like instead of cutting everyone big checks, we put it right back in the technology. And we just know that if we keep plugging away and doing 5-6 updates a year with new capabilities, that people will see that we're one of them, because really that's what we are, is we're hunters. And that's the kind of the core of Spartan Forge. But not only that, is, when people have questions, or just like you've been asking me about new features that are coming out, like I deal with everyone on social media personally. So when they see something they don't like about the app, or they see something they love, or see something they want to see expanded upon, they can message me on the Spartan Forge Instagram or on Facebook and ask those questions. And if they have good recommendations or whatever, like I give lots of guys free accounts, because they'll come to us with an update or with something that I've never thought about before, and I'm like, actually, that's really useful. So it's really about building a community around this hunting app and showing people that we're not just like a faceless company that nobody knows who's running it or what we're doing. It's like, this is truly built by hunters, and it's built for hunters, and that's kind of been my priority from the beginning, is to keep, to not abstract away the leadership of this company from the hunters that we live and die with. So that's kind of been my focus from the beginning, and keeping quality guys like yourself and, Andy May, who's a killer, or the Seek One guys, or, Bo Martonic and Garrett Prawl. All of these guys are amazing hunters, and they are the product owners as well. So everything we build it for the hunter. And so if there's not something inside the application that people want to see, like, hit me up on Instagram, hit me up on Facebook. We're trying to do as much of that stuff as possible to keep people engaged, and then, use our profits in the application and use it for taking, with Black Rifle this year, we did the Veterans Adaptive Hunt out in Texas. We did a hunt with George St. Pierre out doing bear hunting in Canada this year. We're doing a Spartan Forge Veterans Hunt in November, probably out in North Dakota here. So giving back to the veteran community that kind of makes this whole wild experiment work is one of the things that we really care about. So that's kind of the culture of our company. So it's about hunters pushing technology, giving people a tool that they can actually use, and then giving back to the communities that make this whole thing possible.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. And I do appreciate everything that you guys do for the outdoor industry and the veterans in general. And that's one of the cool things too, is, supporting Spartan Forge. I know what you guys stand for. And that means a lot. Obviously, I don't want to go into a deep, dark wormhole of what other softwares and companies they're doing, and land and what they own and don't own, and everything else. But it's been a true pleasure, working with you on that. But yeah, man, I don't want to keep you on too long. I just wanted to make sure and get you hop on here and get, kind of let everyone know about the new updates, on the app. And thank you again as well for, everything you're doing for the industry. It's a true pleasure working with a company and an owner like you. You do put everything back into the app, which is amazing. And not many people do that. So it's been great.
Yeah, well, it's been a pleasure working with you as well. And like I said, I'm not sure if I know you had a camp. Didn't you have a camp this summer with some folks? Like,
we have one tomorrow. Actually, we have another one tomorrow. So,
yeah, well, make sure you get me their emails, and then you guys should poke around there in Cyber Scout. It's only on the web right now. We will get it into the mobile app, but like letting people know that, hey, once you leave this camp, this is a resource for you, to help continuing that, that you learn, and that the application, and that it's helping you when you step foot out of the schoolhouse. So make sure I get all those emails too, and we'll set all those guys up with accounts.
Cool. No, that sounds good, man. Well, I really appreciate you hopping on the podcast with me. And we definitely have everybody get the app that comes to the course. So, it's a very easy thing to me have people, to get to use while we're out there. But yeah, man, thanks again, for everything. And I'll probably get you back on the podcast again after season, go over how everything went, and, shoot the shit and talk about hunting. But yeah, man, thank you.
Thanks, Aaron. Have a good day.
All right, buddy. Take it easy.